Ethan Riley, a retired cop haunted by a lost mission, found only cold silence in the Appalachian Mountains. But one blizzard night, that silence was shattered when he rescued a German Shepherd puppy, Luna, who whispered a single, impossible word: "Wait." That word wasn't a trick. It was a desperate plea, a direct echo of the trauma he couldn't bury. As Luna's presence healed the man, the threat of a cruel, scientific cage loomed. Ethan knew he had only one choice: abandon the one creature who saved him, or watch her freedom die. What happened next, the final test of freedom and the powerful, unbelievable echo she left behind, will change everything you believe about hope. Before we start, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind howled a restless, frozen song through the steep granite peaks surrounding Black Mountain, North Carolina. It was early December, and the air held the metallic tang of impending snow. Black Mountain was usually a quaint, vibrant artist's haven, nestled perfectly in the Blue Ridge Mountains. But tonight, the atmosphere was grim. Streetlights cast dull, isolated halos against the heavy, bruised sky, and the few stores still open glowed with the forced cheer of early Christmas decorations fighting the gloom. The weather reports had been grim. A severe winter storm was sweeping through the valleys, promising inches of ice and blinding snow. Behind the wheel of a worn, dark green Ford pickup, driving slowly along the narrow, winding dirt road toward his property, sat Ethan Riley. Ethan Riley, 35, was a man built like a wall that had been slightly cracked but refused to fall. He was tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of frame that once wore a heavy police uniform with authority, now draped loosely in thick flannel and a heavy work jacket. His dark brown hair was closely cropped, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face permanently etched with exhaustion. The lines around his eyes were not from laughter, but from years of sleepless, high-alert watches. He had retired early from the NYPD, an honorable discharge that tasted like ash, 2 years prior. He was a man defined by his past, living in a self-imposed exile, trying to find a silence that could drown out the city's endless accusatory noise. His personality was guarded, disciplined to the point of rigidity, and deeply isolated, burdened by post-traumatic stress disorder stemming from a hostage rescue mission that had ended in failure and a child's death. Ethan drove with one hand resting near a faded, laminated photo tucked into the sun visor, the face of a 7-year-old girl, the last victim he had failed to save. He wasn't looking for peace, he was looking for nothing. The truck finally pulled up to his destination, a remote, dilapidated cabin that had once belonged to his grandfather, hidden deep among the snow-dusted pines. He had bought the place for a symbolic $1 just to get away from New York. It was a place where no one knew his name or what he had done. Inside the cabin, the air was perpetually cold, smelling of damp wood smoke and dust. Ethan went through his evening routine with the mechanical precision of old training. He checked the bolts on the single door. Then he moved to the worn pine dresser in the corner. He opened the top drawer and pushed aside a stack of old maps and a compass. Lying beneath them was his service weapon, a Glock 17, meticulously cleaned and carefully placed. He ran his thumb across the cold metal surface, his eyes scanning the empty room, a habit ingrained from years on patrol: always be vigilant. He never kept it loaded, not since he moved here, but he checked its position every single night. The gesture was a ritual, a silent reassurance that if the chaos came back, he was ready. Tonight, however, the silence in the cabin felt too heavy, pressed by the gathering storm. He needed supplies. Ethan got back into the pickup, the headlights immediately swallowed by the rapidly falling, thick snow. He drove the 3 miles back toward the main road, heading for the nearest small-town convenience store before the roads became impassable. He passed a familiar landmark, the remnants of an old gas station and convenience store, long shut down. Just across from the abandoned station stood a small, brightly painted Victorian house with a crooked sign reading, Vance Vintage Finds. This was the store owned by Eleanor Ellie Vance. Ellie Vance, 50s, was a study in warmth and resilience. She was short, comfortably rounded, with vibrant gray-blonde hair often tied back with a colorful scarf. Her hands, though aged, were nimble and strong from years of handling antique furniture and pottery. Her face was kind, lined not by worry but by genuine, frequent smiles. Ellie was the unofficial heart of the small, scattered community, known for her gentle persistence and ability to see past a person's surface. Her good nature remained intact despite the loss of her husband, a beloved local firefighter, 5 years earlier. As Ethan's truck crawled past, Ellie's own car, a dusty Subaru Outback, was parked outside. She wasn't inside the antique shop. She was standing on the porch of the dilapidated gas station, carefully placing something on the porch railing before hurrying back into the growing storm. Ellie had noticed Ethan's dark pickup traversing the road every day for months. Seeing his solitude, she had recently begun her own quiet mission. That night she was leaving a plate covered with foil, a freshly baked apple pie, on the porch of his isolated cabin, along with a small handwritten card inviting him to the town's Christmas Eve gathering. She knew he wouldn't come, but she believed in leaving the door open. Ethan, focused on the treacherous driving conditions, didn't see her car or her mission. Ethan reached the main highway where the snow was now a white curtain. He slowed significantly, his high beams cutting through the gloom. That was when he saw it. A small, dark shape pressed against the concrete barrier of the abandoned gas station's parking lot. He tapped the brakes, the heavy truck sliding slightly before stopping. He sat for a moment, listening. Above the shrieking wind, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a weak, desperate whine. He stepped out into the biting cold. The temperature dropped instantly, hitting him with the force of an ice bath. He pulled his collar up and followed the faint sound. It led him behind the structure to a dumpster area, where an oversized, damp cardboard box lay half buried in a drift. He kicked the snow away and pulled the box toward him. What he saw momentarily stole his breath, erasing the NYPD training and the years of emotional numbness. Huddled together inside the box were 2 German shepherd puppies, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. They were tiny, their coats stiff with ice, their eyes wide and glassy with fear and cold. The larger of the 2, actively trying to shield its smaller sibling, though its own whimpers were ragged and weak. The smaller one, barely moving, its breath shallow, nestled deep against the other's belly. It was clearly the weakest, the most fragile. Ethan's heart, a muscle he thought had atrophied long ago, gave a painful, visceral lurch. Who the hell could do this? He carefully scooped up the entire box, the cardboard dissolving under the weight of the snow and puppies. He rushed back to his truck, placing the animals on the passenger seat. He blasted the heat, watching the 2 shivering masses. The stronger pup lifted its head slightly and gave a soft, pleading whine. Ethan looked at them, then at his own rough hands. He saw the scars of a life spent in violence and failure. He had barely managed to keep himself alive, let alone 2 helpless lives. The idea of adopting both, of committing to a responsibility that large, sent a wave of familiar panic through his chest. He was a man who specialized in endings, not beginnings. His gaze settled on the smaller, weaker pup. It wasn't moving. Its faint, fluttering breath was the only proof of life. He knew, with the cold, calculating logic of a retired cop, that he couldn't handle 2. The stronger one had a better chance of survival at the local shelter, if he could even reach it tonight. But the smallest one was on the edge, needing absolute focus. And in that tiny, desperate creature, Ethan saw an echo of the life he had lost, the one he had failed to protect. This time, he wouldn't fail. He made a terrible choice, born of practicality and pain. He zipped his heavy jacket open. He gently lifted the smaller pup, carefully tucking the tiny, freezing body against his own chest, directly over his heart. He closed the zipper slowly, securing the creature close to his warmth. He felt its faint, rapid heartbeat thudding against his ribs. He left the box containing the slightly stronger pup in a dry, sheltered spot near Ellie's store, hoping she or someone else would find it in the morning. He left a hastily scribbled note. Found this one, too. Couldn't take both. Please help. He looked down at the small head of the pup nestled against him. Hold on, little one, he murmured, the words rough. You're not dying out here. He turned the truck around, skipping the store run, his sole mission now survival. He drove back toward the sanctuary of his remote cabin. Back inside the cabin, the fireplace was roaring. Ethan laid the shivering pup on an old, soft navy blanket near the hearth. He retrieved his first aid kit. He found a small, clean syringe, once used for cleaning minor cuts, and filled it with warm, diluted milk he had on hand. He cradled the pup's head, his large, scarred hands moving with an almost terrifying tenderness and precision. He squeezed a few drops onto its tiny tongue. The pup's mouth moved weakly, a small, barely perceptible swallow. He stared at its eyes, which were slowly clearing. They were a stunning, knowing shade of amber, reflecting the firelight. You're fighting, he whispered, wiping a tear of sweat or fear from his brow. Always fighting the dark? He looked out the small window at the sky. A slice of moon, pale and sickly, was barely visible through the swirling snow. Luna, he murmured. That's your name. You're my little Luna. He continued to gently feed her, drop by drop, minute by minute. Throughout the long, silent night, a forgotten cop standing guard over a fragile life. The storm raged through the night, yet inside the small, dilapidated cabin, a different kind of vigil was kept. Ethan, fueled by strong black coffee and a rigid sense of military-grade duty, monitored Luna like she was a critical patient in an emergency room. His training, honed by years of managing crises in the chaotic environment of the NYPD, kicked in. This wasn't about emotion. It was about procedure, resource management, and maintaining core temperature. He regulated the cabin heat, wrapping Luna in layers of blankets, administering the diluted milk with clockwork precision every hour. He was no doctor, but he was a survivor, and saving Luna became his final, non-negotiable mission. He allowed himself no sleep, viewing the tiny German Shepherd puppy as the sole, tangible link to redemption. He saw the flicker of life in her amber eyes, refusing to let that flame extinguish. By mid-morning, the storm had tapered to a heavy drizzle, leaving the forest blanketed in thick, wet snow. Luna was stable but clearly weak. She needed professional help. Ethan, still wearing his heavy jacket and flannel shirt, secured Luna in a shoebox lined with a blanket, placing it on the passenger seat of his pickup. As he backed out, he scanned the ground near the abandoned gas station, looking for the box he'd left behind, hoping Ellie or someone had found the other pup. The spot was empty. The box and its occupant were gone. He felt a sharp pang of guilt, instantly followed by the hard police reasoning. Less responsibility, better focus on Luna. He drove toward the nearest town center, Boone. The clinic was a small, practical building with a faded sign, Alcott Veterinary Services. Inside, the air smelled sharply of antiseptic and damp dog fur. The door chimed, drawing out the owner, Dr. Alcott. Dr. Alcott, 60s, was a thin, wiry man with the look of someone who preferred animals to people. His face was deeply tanned and wrinkled, suggesting years spent outdoors on farm calls, and his salt and pepper hair was thin, slicked back from his forehead. He wore thick, practical glasses balanced on his nose and a stained white lab coat over a thick denim shirt. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, possessing a quiet, no-nonsense manner forged by years of witnessing both tragedy and recovery. He glanced at Ethan, the tight shoulders, the guarded eyes, and then his focus narrowed immediately on the fragile shoebox. "Found her in the dump, did you?" Dr. Alcott murmured, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't wait for Ethan's answer, carefully lifting Luna onto the examination table. He meticulously checked her temperature, heart rate, and reflexes. Severe hypothermia, some dehydration. Good job with the slow warm-up. You're military, or used to be, aren't you? NYPD, Ethan replied, his voice gruff. Tactical. Dr. Alcott nodded, his eyes observing the scars on Ethan's knuckles. Same principle, discipline, focus. Well, Mr. Riley, Ethan Riley. Mr. Riley, Dr. Alcott continued, setting down his stethoscope. She's been through trauma, but physically she'll pull through. What she's running on now is pure fight. That, and whatever you're putting into her. He looked directly at Ethan. Animals like this, they don't fight just for themselves. They fight for the person holding them. She's clinging to your duty, Mr. Riley. Don't let her down. The doctor's words hit Ethan with the force of an indictment, confirming that his latest mission was now inextricably tied to his own survival. They were finishing up, getting prescriptions, when the clinic door chimed again. Ellie Vance walked in, dressed warmly in her thick wool coat, carrying a small paper bag. She immediately spotted Ethan, whose head snapped up in surprise. "Ethan Riley! I thought that truck was yours!" Ellie exclaimed, her voice warm, instantly dissolving the professional distance Ethan had maintained. "Dr. Alcott, I just dropped off some fresh bandages, saw the truck and figured I'd check in on the little one you left the note about." Ethan stiffened. "The note? You found the other one?" Ellie's face softened. "Oh, dear. No. When I went out this morning, the box was gone. Someone must have gotten to him before the shelter opened. But I did find your note, and I saw your pie untouched." She walked over, her presence radiating a quiet, domestic strength. "I figured you might need something practical now." She handed him the bag, which contained high-protein puppy food and a few old, soft flannel blankets. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had traded one pup's life for another's care, and the abandoned one was now unaccounted for. "Thank you, Miss Vance. I appreciate it." Ellie pulled up a stool nearby, watching him carefully wrap Luna. "You know, Mr. Riley, I saw the way you were holding her. You remind me of my Jack." Ethan looked up, surprised by the sudden intimacy. "My husband, Jack Vance, he was a fireman. Used to bring home everything broken. Tools, stray cats, occasionally even people who'd lost their way." Ellie's eyes turned distant, remembering her late husband. "He died in a warehouse fire 5 years ago. Went back in for a casualty who wasn't there." She looked at Ethan, her gaze unflinching. "Jack always believed that success wasn't measured by the outcome, but by the relentless effort, the trying. He had a saying, 'Redemption isn't found in winning, but in never stopping the fight.'" Ethan absorbed her words, recognizing the burden she carried. Her simple wisdom cut through his self-recrimination. She wasn't judging the failure, she was validating the effort. That night, back in the silence of the cabin, the light was low, provided only by the crackling fireplace. Ethan, exhausted but running on adrenaline, sat in a worn armchair, Luna resting on his chest, tucked safely inside a flannel blanket. He was drifting, the warmth and rhythmic breathing of the small animal lulling him into a fragile state of rest. The cabin was silent, the kind of silence that usually brought the screaming memories rushing back. He felt the cold touch of the past, the weight of the little girl's death. He saw the grainy image of the hostage video. He heard the radio transmission cutting out. Suddenly, Ethan jolted awake. The nightmare hadn't fully formed, but he was breathing hard, his hand instinctively reaching toward the Glock 17 in the dresser drawer. Luna stirred. She was trembling slightly, sensing the shift in his emotional state. She made a faint noise, a sound somewhere between a chirp and a weak cry. Then, from deep within her tiny throat, came a syllable. Not a bark, but something human-shaped, broken, but clear. "Wait." The word hung in the quiet, firelit air. Wait. It was the same word, the same desperate plea he had heard on the radio feed just before the breach, just before the mission failed 2 years ago. Ethan froze, every muscle tight. He stared down at the puppy's amber eyes, wide and focused on his face. He whispered, afraid to move, Did you just talk to me?" Luna didn't repeat the word. She just blinked slowly, then nuzzled her tiny, cold nose against his neck, her trembling gradually easing. But the message had landed. Wait. Stop moving. Stop reaching. Stop panicking. The shock was a physical blow. The impossible had occurred, and it had grounded him instantly, pulling him violently out of the memory loop. Ethan lowered his hand, his pulse slowing. Luna's tiny, impossible voice had just shattered the perfect silence he had sought, and in doing so, had saved him from himself. The impossible word, wait, spoken by the tiny German Shepherd puppy Luna, had changed the cabin's atmosphere entirely. The oppressive silence that Ethan had sought was replaced by a strange, expectant quiet, a silence punctuated by the potential for speech. Ethan no longer felt entirely alone. He felt observed, understood, perhaps even judged, by a creature he could hold in one hand. The discipline of his former life was now entirely focused on nurturing this anomaly. He kept Luna's existence and her vocal abilities a strict secret. However, the trip to Dr. Alcott's clinic and Ellie's discovery had already sown seeds of curiosity in the small community. Rumors, like wildfire and dry pine needles, began to spread. They twisted the initial story. The former cop saved a genius dog. The dog can talk. It's a miracle. The attention Ethan craved to avoid soon arrived on his remote dirt road in the form of a sleek black sedan from out of state. The woman who emerged was Dr. Lena Marshall, a prominent animal behaviorist from a well-funded university research institute in Virginia. Dr. Lena Marshall was strikingly composed, with sharp, intelligent features framed by immaculate, silvery blonde hair cut into a severe bob. She was tall and slim, dressed in a tailored, expensive wool coat that looked utterly out of place amidst the mud and pines. Her demeanor was intensely professional, bordering on cold, prioritizing data and scientific discovery above all else. She viewed the world as a problem set to be solved, and Luna represented the ultimate, tantalizing variable. She carried a sleek tablet and a briefcase, her gray eyes measuring Ethan and his surroundings with clinical detachment. Dr. Marshall approached the porch, her demeanor practiced and persuasive. "Mr. Riley, I'm Dr. Marshall. I received an interesting report from a colleague in Boone. The vocalization of your German Shepherd puppy is highly irregular, suggesting advanced cognitive mimicry. I believe she represents an unprecedented opportunity to understand interspecies communication. I am here to offer you a contract. We want to study Luna." Ethan, standing tall in his heavy flannel shirt and work jeans, crossed his arms, his posture defensive. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes and instantly felt the old institutional dread. "Study her? That sounds like taking her." "We call it a controlled environment," she countered, her smile practiced. "We would provide state-of-the-art care, the best nutrition, specialized training staff. We could unlock her ability, Mr. Riley. Imagine the good for the scientific community, the breakthrough in understanding companion species." "I've seen enough cages in my life, Doctor," Ethan stated flatly, thinking not of steel bars but of the emotional confinement he had lived under. "And I've seen what happens when people start studying something they want to control. The answer is no." Dr. Marshall's polite smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of professional annoyance. She tried to appeal to his discipline. "You were an officer, Mr. Riley. You understand the value of data and order. This is for science, not sentiment." She left her card and a complex research proposal, promising to return. The encounter rattled Ethan, pushing him further into isolation. He needed an anchor, and ironically, Luna provided it, simply by existing. That night, the tension and the confrontation with Dr. Marshall proved too much. Sleep offered no escape. Ethan was plunged into the recurring nightmare, the dust, the shouting, the choking heat of the city apartment, the clock counting down, the sound of the breach, the screams. He woke up violently, thrashing in the damp sheets, shouting incoherent commands. His heart hammered against his ribs, convinced he was back in that moment, reaching for the life he couldn't save. He was trapped in the loop. His large hand shot out, grasping for the drawer handle where the Glock 17 lay, needing the cold weight of the weapon to ground him in the present. Suddenly, Luna, who had been sleeping in a soft pile of blankets near the hearth, moved. She sprang onto the bed, her tiny weight landing squarely on Ethan's chest, her small paws kneading gently against his flannel shirt. Her movement was frantic but determined. She made that strange, deliberate sound again, louder this time, a broken syllable of human speech. Safe. The word echoed in the small cabin. Safe. Ethan froze, his hand millimeters from the drawer. The single, simple word, uttered by Luna, acted like a circuit breaker, instantly shattering the hallucination. He stared at the terrified but resolute German Shepherd pup pressing into his sternum. Her amber eyes held his, confirming the reality of the small wooden cabin, the smell of pine smoke, not gunpowder. He lowered his body slowly, releasing the tension in his arm. He clutched the puppy, burying his face in her soft, warm fur. The word was a direct command, an absolute truth that superseded his PTSD. He finally succumbed to exhaustion, the fear replaced by the simple, profound weight of a small animal he needed to protect. While Ethan retreated deeper into his self-imposed sanctuary, Ellie Vance was quietly working to pull him back out. She understood that service veterans, particularly those carrying emotional scars, needed purpose and community more than they needed silence. Ellie had organized a small local fundraiser for the regional animal shelter, hoping to turn the community's curiosity about Ethan's dog into genuine altruism. She sent him an invitation, knowing his reluctance. As expected, Ethan didn't show up, but the next morning, Ellie found a sealed envelope taped to the collection box outside her shop. Inside was a cashier's check for a substantial amount, far more than the entire event raised, signed simply, E.R. Ethan had refused to participate publicly, but his silent, immense contribution spoke volumes about his burgeoning empathy. His next step surprised even Ellie. He showed up at her shop, Vance Vintage Finds, unannounced. "That old roof of yours is going to cave in if you don't patch it," Ethan stated, his voice flat, avoiding eye contact. He was wearing work gloves and carrying his toolbox. "I've got time." Ellie, who was dusting a fragile porcelain doll, smiled gently. "Well, I certainly wouldn't say no to help, Mr. Riley, especially from a man who knows his way around a hammer." Ethan didn't answer, simply climbing onto the ladder with the efficiency of a former tactical officer scaling a wall. Over the next few days, Ethan worked silently on Ellie's roof, patching shingles and reinforcing beams. This sustained physical labor, removed from the urgency of saving Luna, was therapeutic. It was a tangible way to build something instead of tearing it down. Meanwhile, Dr. Marshall was not deterred by Ethan's initial rejection. Viewing him as an obstacle, not a caretaker, she utilized her institutional connections. She reached out to the local county officials, citing potential ethical breaches and animal welfare concerns given the dog's unique communication skills. She began the bureaucratic process of seeking a court order to gain legal custody of Luna for critical scientific observation. The paperwork, sterile and official, was moving slowly through the local Appalachian system, threatening to destroy the fragile peace Ethan and Luna had found. The official-looking envelope, a dry, legalistic threat from Dr. Marshall's institute, sat on Ethan's worn kitchen table. It was a formal motion to compel compliance, the cold, bureaucratic machine grinding against the fragile life Luna represented. Ethan knew he could fight the custody battle, But the energy required, the public exposure, the risk of losing, it was unbearable. He was trapped between the fear of letting go and the fear of keeping her confined. The tiny German shepherd, barely 8 weeks old now, was growing stronger, her unique vocabulary expanding slightly, yet she remained utterly dependent on him. He saw the impending courtroom as the ultimate cage, one built not of steel, but of expectation and control. He spent his mornings completing the roof repairs for Ellie. The physical labor was his sole reprieve, a way to anchor himself in the present. He was up on the steep, rain-slicked slope of the Victorian shop's roof, hammering in the final shingles, when his focus wavered. A flash of memory, the wet, chaotic scramble during the raid, hit him. He missed a step, the slick moss offering no purchase. His large frame lost balance, and he fell hard, a sickening crunch echoing as his ankle twisted against the ladder's rung before he slammed onto the wet ground below. Ellie rushed out, dropping the antique doll she was dusting. She found Ethan pale, biting back a shout of pain, his ankle already swelling to the size of a grapefruit. Her gentle persistence, the same strength she used to run her shop alone, immediately took over. She managed to get him into her dusty Subaru, driving him straight to the small clinic where Dr. Alcott quickly set the severely sprained ankle in a walking boot. Ellie insisted on driving him back to his secluded cabin, maneuvering the heavy boot and his imposing, pain-racked body into his armchair by the fireplace. This was the first time Ethan had been truly vulnerable, entirely reliant on another person since leaving New York. It was the first time anyone had been inside his cabin since he had arrived. The silence he cherished was suddenly broken by the gentle movements of Ellie tending the fire and organizing the medical supplies. He was immobile, exposed, and intensely uncomfortable. As the painkillers took effect, the rigid walls Ethan had built around his past began to crumble. Lying there, helpless, he looked at Ellie, the white woman, kind-faced with her practiced tenderness, and the weight became too much to bear alone. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he started, his voice rough and low, staring into the flickering flames, avoiding her eyes. "The mission, the last one. We were supposed to go in fast, quiet, hostage rescue, but the intel was bad. The target, a child, a little girl, 7 years old. When we breached, she wasn't." He trailed off, the images searing behind his eyelids. Ellie sat quietly, mending a tear in his flannel shirt, offering no forced sympathy, only a calm presence. Ethan continued, the words spilling out, a confession, a purge, for the first time. "I pulled the team out, but I kept hearing her voice on the compromised radio feed just before everything went silent. That little girl's voice, and Luna's word. Wait. It's the same echo. It means I paused. I hesitated, and she died because I waited." Ellie stopped sewing. She looked at him, not with pity, but with the clear, hard-won understanding of a survivor. "Ethan," she said gently, "that little girl's death wasn't your fault. That hesitation you heard, the wait, it was the sound of chaos overwhelming order. And you know what the only choice you have left is? It's not about finding someone to blame, or even about winning. It's about living now. You have to live." Her words were a stark, necessary antidote to the poison of his guilt. Over the next few days, confined to the armchair, Ethan watched Luna growing bolder, testing her boundaries, practicing her strange, fragmented sounds, and looking longingly at the open forest. The legal pressure continued to mount. Ethan realized Dr. Marshall was right about one thing. Luna's future involved a cage, whether it was the scientific control she demanded or the anxious confinement he imposed to keep her hidden. He could not protect her freedom by taking away her wildness. The decision was absolute and heartbreaking. A week after the fall, when he could hobble around the cabin on crutches, Ethan woke early. The sunrise was cold and clear, washing the Appalachian peaks in silver light. He secured Luna in a carrier and drove slowly, painfully toward the highest, most secluded clearing on the mountain path, a place of wild, untamed beauty. He opened the carrier. Luna jumped out, sniffing the wet, thawing earth with unbridled curiosity. He knelt, leaning heavily on the crutch, his face level with hers. "You belong to this, Luna," he whispered, running his rough hand over her dense black and tan fur. "You're too powerful to be locked up." He looked into her wise, amber eyes. "They want to cage you. I can't let them." He placed his hand firmly on the top of her head. "You are free, Luna. Go. Go now." Luna stared back at him for a long, silent moment, her tail giving a tentative, questioning wag. Then she let out a single, soft whine, a sound of acknowledgement, not complaint. She turned, her small legs pumping, and disappeared into the thick maze of the pine forest, swallowed whole by the vast, quiet expanse of the Appalachians. Ethan remained kneeling there long after she was gone, the silence rushing back in, heavier and colder than before. The days that followed were empty, punctuated only by Ellie's visits to check on his recovery. He felt the familiar numbness creeping back, the profound, painful quiet of a man who had chosen abandonment over attachment. Then, one rainy afternoon, a week after Luna had gone, Ethan hobbled to the porch to retrieve firewood. Lying neatly on the weathered wood, tucked into the corner where the walls met, was a small, vibrant green pine branch, freshly snapped and fragrant with sap. It was a sign, a deliberate, silent message. Luna was healthy. Luna was near. Luna remembered. The message broke through the growing cold in his heart, a fragile, wild connection that no scientist or judge could ever control. The weeks that followed Luna's intentional release were the hardest for Ethan. He slowly recovered from the ankle injury, the walking boot coming off, but the emotional wound left by Luna's absence festered. The cabin felt truly silent again, haunted not by ghosts of the past, but by the memory of a unique, fragile future he had deliberately pushed away. The only relief was the daily, silent sign, the fresh green pine branch left on his porch by the free German shepherd, a constant, gentle echo of her presence in the vast Appalachian wild. He spent his days helping Ellie at her shop. The work was less about carpentry and more about companionship, a truce with the outside world. He was learning to live in the community, not just beside it. One cold, pale morning, just as the early sunlight was filtering through the high peaks, Ethan woke to a sound that shattered the empty quiet, a scratching at the cabin door. It wasn't the tentative, single scratch of a nervous raccoon. It was a measured, rhythmic pattern. Scratch, pause, scratch, 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 tap, tap, tap. The signal he had taught Luna when she was barely 6 weeks old, a tiny game for a tiny fighter. Ethan froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips, his heart hammering in his chest with terrifying disbelief. He hadn't heard that specific rhythm in months. He hobbled to the door and slowly pulled the heavy wood inward. Standing on the threshold were 2 German shepherds. The first was Luna, now fully grown, strong, and sleek, her black and tan coat thick and gleaming with health. Her amber eyes held the same depth of ancient understanding that had once commanded him to wait. She was no longer a puppy, she was a confident, free spirit. Standing beside her was a second dog, equally magnificent, but slightly larger and darker, with a proud, protective stance. This was Shadow, the pup Ethan had left behind in the box, the one he had tried to abandon to save himself. Shadow was clearly the alpha of the pair, powerful and resolute. His presence explained the missing box. Someone had saved him, and somehow the brothers, for they looked undeniably related, had found their way back together. Luna carried a small, vibrant trillium flower, a local wildflower symbolizing recovery and return, delicately clamped in her jaws. She stepped onto the wooden floor, setting the flower carefully at Ethan's feet. Ethan sank to his knees, his throat tight, tears blurring his vision. "Luna," he managed, his voice cracking with emotion. "You came back." Luna lifted her head, meeting his gaze. The air grew still, the crackling fire the only sound. Then, soft but clear, carrying the resonance of the mountains and the echo of the past, the final, undeniable word came. Home. The word dissolved Ethan's last remaining emotional wall. He reached out, pulling both powerful dogs into a tight embrace, laughing a broken, joyous sound. The return of Luna and Shadow was the catalyst the small community needed. The news traveled faster than the mountain wind. Ellie was the first to arrive, finding Ethan on the floor, surrounded by the triumphant returnees. "Dear Lord," Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her kind face. They came back. They brought him back. The shared miracle spurred Ellie and Ethan into action, fueled by the conviction that the dogs had returned for a reason. They decided to transform Ethan's isolated cabin into something tangible, something restorative. Ellie organized the community. The townspeople who had watched Ethan's isolation and believed the rumors of the talking dogs rallied around the idea. The construction quickly became a communal effort, a way for the town to process its own quiet scars. A new face joined them. Mark Jansen, a former Army medic in 40s, white man, gaunt but steady, with close-cropped graying hair and an intense gaze. Mark had lost his leg in a roadside blast overseas and now ran a small mobile welding business. He was quiet, efficient, and rarely smiled, but he showed up every day, fabricating new hinges and railings. He spoke little, yet his presence was a powerful validation. Ethan and Ellie named the center the Silent Watchman, a sanctuary dedicated to rescuing and training German Shepherds to become therapy and service animals for veterans and first responders suffering from PTSD. Ethan, shedding his uniform of guilt, found his new purpose. His rigorous discipline, once focused on combat and surveillance, was now channeled into patient, gentle training. On the day of the center's opening, the air was crisp, the mountains bathed in warm, healing sunlight. Ethan, clean-shaven, dressed in simple work clothes, stood straighter than he had in years. Luna and Shadow, the two German shepherds, now fully mature, sat proudly beside him, their amber eyes observing the crowd. The center was bustling. Mark Jansen was seen quietly talking with a young firefighter who looked lost and shell-shocked. Ellie, smiling radiantly, handed out her famous apple pie. Ethan watched her from across the yard, her silver-blonde hair gleaming, realizing that she hadn't just saved him. She had helped him build the life he was always meant to live. He reached down, and Luna nudged his hand, Shadow resting his broad head on his thigh. Ethan looked out at the peaceful mountains, the community, the men and women finding quiet connection through the dogs, and he finally understood. He was no longer the guilt-ridden former cop, but the sentinel of hope, the silent watchman. He had let go of the need to win, and in doing so, he had found his true home. The miracle in this story came not with wings, but with paws. God often sends us angels not to solve our problems, but to remind us that love, connection, and hope still breathe, even when we feel we cannot. Luna and Shadow, who carried the burden of speech, became the silent watchman over a broken human soul. The final word Luna spoke, home, is the greatest lesson. Home is not a place, but the sense of purpose and belonging we build after we forgive ourselves. If you are struggling with a past mistake or feeling isolated, remember the echo of Luna's voice. Look for the small, silent signs of grace in your life. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that life still holds goodness. Drop a comment below and tell me where you found hope today. May God bless you, your home, and every soul that chooses to heal.